Alright, Travis Wayne Goodsell. I noticed on YouTube that John Dehlin did a video after I had done my videos on the handbook, and I may have gotten a total of the parts that I've done so far. Maybe I got reached 100, maybe 50. But John Dehlin yesterday did part 1 and has already showing 4,800. And so, as I've done videos indicating that the church doesn't care when they allow ex-Mormons the views that they get, although he's been doing Mormon stories for a long time, so he's got a base. But there's clear censorship towards me. And as I've pointed out, the church has invested heavily in social medias and internet platforms, Google and Microsoft, and Hewlett-Packard, which is the HP computers. And as I pointed out, that's for corrupt purposes. They don't just say, oh, I want to pick this company to invest in. There's always a purpose behind multi-billionaires investing in other companies. And that's for the sole purpose of getting a quid pro quo. If you're unfamiliar with Trump's pardons recently, there were a couple of them at least where the people had people who paid Trump lots and lots and lots and lots of money, and then requested, hey Trump, we've given you lots of money, would you mind helping pardoning so-and-so? Done. That's what investing is for the big boys. And so it's a far cry from my social studies class way back in junior high, I think it was, where we had to pick companies and select them, and they had to increase their stock price in order for us to get a passing grade for the assignment. And if they went into below or stayed the same, we get an F. So that was stressful because he didn't instruct us on the process of investing. But fortunately, I picked a few that did rise a tiny fraction. But no, when the big boys invest, they do it specifically. We want favors, though. And so, yeah, I'm being shut down by Facebook. Well, I was shut down by Facebook, and I was shut down by my website, which was taken over by Square, and YouTube, and Twitter even. So all of these places were shutting me down, as I was known as a troublemaker by the church. And so here we have John Dehlin, who's very popular because of his education. And this is where he's deceiving and conning people. So when he was interviewed by the 3 Questions guy on Fox 13 Utah, and said that I might consider going back to church if the first presidency would let me. They'd have to make a couple of changes. Yeah. So here's the con of John Dehlin. Alrighty. And so I'll cover him. Alright. Let's see, his youth. He was born in Boise, Idaho, so he's not a Utah Mormon, like me. So he has different views about Mormonism than Utah Mormons do. That is well known in the church. However, many Utah Mormons have migrated to California, for example, which is after I had left California. People started migrating to California. And so it's a whole new California Mormon now, because they're Utah-oriented, infiltrating California's Mormonism. And so I'm recognizing California Mormons since that migration that are behaving like Utah Mormons. He, however, was raised in Katy, Texas. But because he's Mormon, he went to BYU. And I don't know why you put this, because the BYU education is worthless. Many of the courses are not recognized by real schools. For example, my biblical studies did not count at the University of Lethbridge. I had to retake the Bible courses. It was a completely different format. It wasn't an overview of the scriptures. It was an in-depth study of primarily the Old Testament. I did get into some Christianity, but completely different program, and I can understand why they don't accept the Mormon religious schools credits, because you learn the Bible outside of Mormon education. You don't learn the Bible. You may think you do, Mormons, but you don't. I can just simply point out the documentary hypothesis, and you're like, huh? Exactly. But I can assure you the documentary hypothesis is a complete fraud. But you don't even know what it is in the first place to know that it's a fraud, or know how to identify it as a fraud. Anyway, so summa cum laude, who gives a I don't care. It's from BYU. Anybody can get that from BYU. After graduation, Dehlin worked for 5 years in software as a consultant. See, that's deceiving. They have him working in tech companies, but he's never involved in tech. He's just a consultant, or he's, programming. The main thing he's programmed is this thing called OpenCourseWare, which is where you give lessons to tech companies. And so he's just a salesman. That's all he is. He does ads for companies, or does lesson courses. Not that big of a deal. And so anyway, and so yeah, his master's then is in instructional technology. Not technology, instructional technology. You see what's going on here? He's going into an educational field of deception, because advertising is all about deception. tricking people into buying your product. And so, let's see, MIT hired him because of his open courseware. Not as a technician, but because of his little lesson thing. And so here's the big one. Here's where his deception education is going to propel him into higher rankings. In 2015, Dehlin received his doctorate in clinical and counseling psychology. Dum da da dum. The pseudoscience. The fake science. And I've gone over this. It's a fake science because they do not use standard scientific measurements and theory development. And so, yes, Rick's taught me the Bible according to the Mormon bias, the deception of Mormonism. When I went to the University of Lethbridge, they taught me the science-based study of the Bible. Huge difference. Mormon study of the Bible, pseudoscience. Outside of Utah, real science-based. And so psychology is a complete scam. And yet they've dominated America. As you see everywhere, you see Trump, he does something wild and wacky or criminal, and people are saying, oh, he needs to see counseling, he needs a psychiatrist, and those psychiatrists all gathered together and created a book about how Trump is mentally ill and blah, 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 blah. It's all a scam. The shootings that go on, what's the first thing they do after a shooting? They send in the counselors and therapists. And why? Because the children just went through a trauma. And instead of focusing their anger on the cause of the shooting, that counselors come in and tell them, get over it. They don't say it bluntly, like Mick Mulvaney did about Trump's crimes, but they do it in their brainwashing techniques. And I've been going over those brainwashing techniques with you on my playlist, or the playlist for brainwashing, LDS brainwashing. You can also go to Theremin Trees. His channel is excellent for religious scams, the fallacy of religions. He's not Mormon. I don't think he's ever involved Mormonism, except for one time a little cartoon character of his sort of looked like Joseph Smith. But he has he's entertaining because he's able to do cartoon videos as he instructs you. And so if you don't like my approach, go to him. And so psychology doesn't use sound reasoning either. That's why they're also a pseudoscience. Because actual science in their development of theories have to be sound in the development of their theories. And so, like I said, the documentary hypothesis is a complete fraud. It's not sound, and therefore must be dismissed. But people who believe in it cling to the false theory regardless. Anyway, Dehlin then took his psychology degree, or PhD, doctorate, I guess. I guess that's PhD. And went to the Sunstone magazine. And there, I remember seeing he was involved with, yeah, okay. This is with his Mormon studies. Dan Witherspoon, former editor of Sunstone magazine, and Natasha Helfer Parker, a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist. So he's, 2 other regular hosts joined Dehlin. Okay, so yeah, he gets people from his field to help him on his Mormon stories. And so those of you who think you're being comforted with these Mormon Stories podcasts, you're being brainwashed. Not church brainwashed, although he did try to convince Mormons to stay in the church at first. No, leave, Mormons. It's all a fraud. And this is why the church, doesn't care about Dehlin. They don't worry about him, even though he's got almost 5,000 views from the one video, and many people love him because of his soothing, pacifying, flattering, deceptive speech as a pseudoscientist. See, I wish I would have known all this when I first tried to reach out to him to tell my story, but he didn't bother to respond, so now I know why. Let's see, he says 2005 he experienced doubts but still stayed in. He was still doing his podcast. In 2010 he resumed the podcast, focusing on faith crises and mental illness. Again, he's now using his pseudoscience to talk about mental illness. Mental illness is a complete fraud and scam also. If people have problems with speech, it's not a mental illness. There's a brain problem that can actually be identified. Brain damage of some kind. Unless he's deaf, then person's speech is altered because of that, because they can't hear themselves speak, and they've never heard themselves speak, and so they don't know how things are supposed to be pronounced with the tongue. But otherwise, you go to the brain that deals with speech, and you can find it. That's just one example. Whereas claims of mental illness, they don't even bother to do exams in the brain. Remember, you just sit on a couch and you share their feelings, like the podcast. The podcast is his couch session with Mormons or former Mormons. He's brainwashing you guys into his line of thinking, which is a mixture of wanting to go back to Mormonism if they just change those couple of things. And so he's trying to comfort people who have left, and at the same time trying to instill in them that if the church just simply changed these couple of things, they can go back to the church like he wants to. And so he's becoming a cult leader. When you're brainwashing people as a leader, you are a cult leader. He's using brainwashing techniques, fallacy arguments, pseudoscience psychiatry, in his podcast. And so this is, he's not a good guy. He may seem like a good guy, but his Wikipedia page says otherwise. So this is what I'm going off of. So I'm not making any of this up. These are known, established facts that psychiatry is a fraud science. And so when you see Utah pushing for the ban on conversion therapy, which was started by psychiatry back in the 80s and even earlier, and now that Utah banned it, guess what? Healthcare in Utah, mental health care in Utah, are now pushing for more health care, mental health care. Now that they've banned conversion therapy, now they're saying, okay, give us more resources and money for mental health care. You see what they're doing? And so there's lots of people who don't have mental illnesses who are getting drugged, and after years of being drugged, they're now addicts. And they have to stay on the drugs, otherwise they go through severe withdrawal symptoms. Psychiatrists are drug pushers, legally authorized to do so by the government. This is a horrific thing. They're fraudulent science being licensed by the government to drug people and perform human experimentation because they don't look for a cause. They're just giving drugs to control behavior, and thus they have to experiment with the drugs. I mean, this is war crimes. But fortunately, Dehlin did not get a actual psychiatry degree. It doesn't look like he can prescribe drugs. Thank God. I mean, when you injure yourself, you go to the doctor. You say, I hurt my foot. And you say, well, what happened? I fell off the roof. Okay, we'll do some x-rays. And the x-rays show, yep, sure enough, the one bone is broken in your leg. We'll put a cast on it so that you don't put pressure on it as you walk, and it'll heal in several weeks or months. And if you want some pain, here's some opioids that'll get you addicted, and then when we take you off, you'll then need the fix so that you go into heroin off the streets. And thus the opioid crisis. But in psychiatry, all you do is you get referred. Most people don't go in willingly. If you do, you just destroyed your life. But most people get referred, and they're forced to go. And all that happens is they sit down and talk with you. They place you in a dichotomy box first, then they place you in a non-dichotomous subcategory spectrum box, or spectrum disorder, as they call it. And because you're in the classified box, the pharmaceutical companies have already been working with the psychiatrist to prescribe specific drugs for that box. I mean, this is a horrible nightmare. But that's what they do. They don't do any x-rays of the brain. They don't run any tests, none of that. You may get a nurse to take your vitals, but that doesn't do much of anything. Those are outward symptoms. Those are not causes of the symptoms. And so behavior is a symptom. It's not the cause. But these pseudoscientists say that's the cause, or that's the sign of the cause. When they don't even know what the cause is, they don't even look for it. They just see the outward symptoms. Oh, he rambles off about how Trump is the greatest person ever and inspired by God, therefore he's mentally ill, and therefore he needs this particular drug for this particular mental illness that I'm diagnosing him with. It's all a fraud. So, alrighty, and then in January 2015, the state president initiated another disciplinary council which determined Dehlin's online activity constituted apostasy. That's what my bishop in my local ward here did to me. He says, I've been watching your online activity and the video you posted on my old video channel on how the Book of Mormon is the official doctrine of the church concerning the fall of Adam. Supporting the Book of Mormon, which I thought supported the church, but because it involved my Egyptian study, the bishop was like, oh, only the president of the church can know about Egyptian. And why are you bothering to come to church if you're thinking like this? You obviously don't want to come to church anymore. You don't want to be a member. Why do you bother? Okay, you lost me. I'm not going to be extorted to take down my video in order to continue to come to church. So that's why I'm out. And so, my goodness. And so he was excommunicated because of his Mormon podcast, identifying problems in the church. And so I come along in 1998, I say, hey, Mormon church, I went and did research, found out Joseph Smith was on the right track with his Paleo-Hebrew, his retranslation of the biblical Hebrew text from the King Follett Discourse. Blacklisted me in secret. F. Michael Watson, secretary to President Gordon B. Hinckley, tried to have me excommunicated. Tried. Farms tried to have me kicked out of the church curriculum priesthood. It's priesthood curriculum now, but it was just the curriculum department back then, as I was working on the footnote changes for the scriptures, for the foreign languages scriptures that had the guide to the scriptures rather than is it guide to the scriptures? I think it's guide, or is that the thing that I created? I can't remember. I should be able to figure it out from this, I think. Guide to the scriptures, yeah. So, yeah, I came up with a reference guide and a doctrinal guide and other stuff on my own. But the guide to the scriptures, we were supposed to take that and make changes in the footnotes of the Toplagleiden Bible Dictionary. And because of my extensive study of Mormonism and the scriptures and the Old Testament from Lethbridge, I was whipping through the work that I was initially assigned to do. I'd get some pages to take care of during the week and come back the next Tuesday and to get the next supply for the next week. And I would take them home, use the beta version that they gave me of the computer program, and go through and each and every single footnote, because I had already gone through the footnotes. I mean, I could waste more time on this video and go grab my scriptures and show you how extensively marked up they are. They're worn out and ripping apart, but and some tape in some areas that's coming undone, but I know Mormonism. And so all I would do is go through each footnote and go, no, that's the wrong footnote. And the supervisor would tell me, you don't need to do the changes to the footnotes. We just want you to replace the topical guide and Bible dictionary with Guide to the Scriptures. That's all we want. Yeah, but okay. And I'd take the next assignment home, keep doing the changes that were needed in the footnotes. And after several times of telling me don't do that, he then realized that the changes that I was making were very good and helpful. No duh. Because I didn't need to go searching around the computer. I just knew, oh, this story relates to this story in this other book of Scripture, oftentimes in the Book of Mormon, or in other passages, other books in the Bible or the New Testament. And so I would put those references in that connected to the story. You know, like Bruce R. McConkie did in Isaiah as a perfect example. Half of Isaiah was Bruce R. McConkie's work, the other half, others. And the others used the Strong's Concordance of the Bible, which I use as a little stand for my little monitor here. I don't need it. I don't need the Hebrew or the Greek words. I don't need it because of my knowledge of the Bible and the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price. And so, yeah, I knew exactly. I'd see a footnote for the passage that was involved and just get the idea in my head, this other passage from this other place. So if I needed to find out the exact passage, that's when I use the computer. And type in the key words, there it is. Rather than flipping around my marked up scriptures trying to find it. And so, as a result of that, they placed me in the top committee, overseeing everybody's work, even what I was doing. As Paul noticed in our group, he said, hey, this is yours. Because we had to initial every page that we did, so that they can trace who did what, and who to blame, and all that. Yeah, at that point, it was because David Gaunt was so furious with me and demanded I leave. But again, nope, I was untouchable. And so instead of putting us in different groups, or one of us in a different group, we were the top committee. There was no place for me to go, or him to go. And so what happened was he and James Baker would work together on their portion of reviews, and I and Paul worked on our portion of reviews. And so when Paul saw my work coming through, he said, we don't need to worry about that. It's perfect. But David Gaunt, however, did not have pure intentions in his renderings. He made sure to get the specific passages he knew that he needed to protect. And so homosexuality still remains for the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so even though we were allowed to file a request for a change, we had to put it in paper, and we had to present our arguments for why the change needed to be made. And when James Baker did his request to have Tamar being vindicated rather than the slander she's been given all these millennia, I added my support to that submission as well. So again, both of those failed because of Doctrine and Covenants section 107, where the passage talks about how the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and the 70 all must be in agreement or nothing gets done. And so they used that policy for us in that committee. If there's somebody who disagrees, and David Gaunt disagreed, nothing was changed from the 1979 and the 1981 first editions of the footnotes of the scriptures. And so, what a life. Alright, so that's the difference between John Dehlin and myself. That's why I'm the bigger threat than John Dehlin. He has not had that influence in the church. I was in the church, changing scripture through the footnote process, if anybody bothers to use their footnotes. But again, the things that were accepted were whatever Paul let through. And not the ones that David Gaunt made sure didn't get changed. So there's still plenty of errors left to be corrected. I also tried to get an Egyptian reference so that people would understand that there's Egyptian stuff in the scriptures. For example, Peter. I put in the request, Peter is the Egyptian word for seer. Nope, they didn't want Egyptian. I tried to put in Joseph Smith's translation of half of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. Nope, too complicated, too long. This other passage, it fills up 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. You're not going to take a simple half sentence? Had God created. So, alright. I tried to work within the system. And when the system is so corrupt, you just can't work within the system. They won't let you. And so anybody who thinks that they can make change from within, you're deceiving yourself. So, alrighty. Oh, yeah. He, let's see. Dehlin was also a co-founder of Pro-LGBT Mormons for Marriage website, and that's why the church excommunicated him. He supports the gays. They have a gay agenda. They're making our families gay. My wife's turning gay. She's leaving me. It's not because she's gay. Alright. All these Patheos. Non-denominational, non-partisan online media company providing information and commentary from various religious and non-religious perspectives. Oh, he blogged on it. Okay. Mormon studies. That's the new. Oh, okay. He did a dialogue format. Just a con artist. You know, and I'm sure there's John Dehlin lovers who are going to go and report to him and say, Travis is dissing on you. Fine. But you need to understand why. And if you aren't listening to my video, and you're just being a hater, or you're trying to stir up hate between John Dehlin and I, you're the evil one. So think about that, even though you've already given up and have already communicated to John Dehlin. So, alright, I need to go to bed anyway. I might be able to make the video, and I'll have to upload it in the morning, I guess.